The first slap sounded like a gunshot in the night. Ava Robinson's head snapped to the side, her cheek burning, her braids sliding across her shoulder. The whole village square froze, women with bowls in their hands, boys with sticks, elders on benches, even the goats tugging at ropes like they suddenly understood shame. And then the second slap came. This time, Ava didn't turn her face. She looked straight ahead, breathing hard, holding her tears like a secret. The air smelled of kerosene lamps and dust after Harmattan. A big moon hung above the mango trees, bright enough to show every bruise, every angry eye. Chief Madu's voice cut through the crowd. Let her learn. She is not bigger than the village. Ava's mother, Mama Rose, stood near the front, hands clenched inside her wrapper, shaking like she wanted to scream but didn't have permission. Beside her, Ava's younger brother, Caleb, stared with wide eyes, confused and frightened. Ava's wrists were tied with a thin rope to a wooden post in the center of the square. The rope wasn't even tight, but the message was. She belonged to the village tonight. Ava had begged. She had gone to the chief's compound earlier that day, knees in the red sand, voice trembling but clear. Please, Chief, I can work. I can do anything, just don't force me to marry him. But the chief had smiled like someone enjoying a meal. The poor man is still a man, he had said, and your family owes. Debt does not vanish because your eyes are pretty. Now the chief's guards stood behind her, their cutlasses hanging at their sides, not lifted but present. A warning. In front of Ava stood the man they were forcing on her. His name was Mason Carter. The village called him Mason the Empty Pocket because he worked hard but never seemed to have anything. He fixed roofs, carried blocks, patched broken fences. He was quiet. He didn't drink too much. He didn't flirt around. He lived alone at the edge of the village in a small mud house with an iron roof that rattled in storms. Not a man a girl like Ava had ever imagined marrying. Especially not like this. Mason's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp and restless, like he was counting exits. He wore a faded shirt with the sleeves rolled up and dusty boots that looked too strong for his simple life. His hands were rough, the hands of someone who had worked since childhood. The chief pointed a fat finger at Mason. Do you accept her or not? Today the debt ends. Mason's gaze met Ava's. For the first time that night, Ava saw something in him that didn't match the village story. Not fear. Not desperation. Something else, something controlled, like a man standing in fire without flinching. He opened his mouth. But before he could speak, a roar of engines smashed into the quiet. Headlights flashed against the trees. Dust rolled into the square like a storm. 3 black SUVs, clean and shining, pushed through the narrow road that led into the village. People jumped back, shouting. Children ran behind their mothers. Even the chief stood up straighter, blinking like he didn't believe what he was seeing. The SUVs stopped near the square, perfectly aligned like soldiers. The doors opened. Men in suits stepped out first. Not village suits, not wedding suits, real suits, polished shoes, earpieces. Their faces were serious, their movements quick. The village had only seen men like that in movies. Then, from the middle SUV, an older man stepped out with silver hair and a clean beard. He looked around like he owned the air. And behind him came a woman in a long dark coat, holding a tablet, eyes scanning the crowd. The older man's voice rang out. Which one of you is Chief Madu? Chief Madu swallowed, trying to stay proud, but his voice cracked. I am. The older man stepped forward, shoes not touching the dust like everyone else's did. My name is Mr. Langston Pierce, he said. I represent the Carter family holdings. The village murmured. That name meant nothing to them. But Mason's jaw tightened so fast Ava noticed. His eyes flickered just once to the SUVs, then back to the chief. Mr. Pierce held up a folder. This village has been engaging in unlawful coercion, he said calmly, like he was reading a grocery list. And we are here to stop it. Chief Madu laughed, but it sounded thin. Stop it. Who are you to stop village matters? Mr. Pierce didn't blink. The man you're calling poor, he said, pointing toward Mason, is not poor. The square went silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Mr. Pierce continued, louder now. That man is Mason Carter, the sole heir to Carter Consolidated, a private investment group with assets in energy, logistics, real estate, and technology. The company's valuation is, well, it would take your village 10 lifetimes to count it. A heavy gasp moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Some people laughed nervously, sure it was a joke. Others stared at Mason like he had just grown horns. Chief Mado's face tightened. Lies, he spat. This is my village, I know every man here. Mr. Pierce took one step closer, his tone still calm. Then why has he been here, Chief? Why has the heir to a fortune been carrying blocks and fixing roofs for pennies? Everyone turned to Mason. Ava felt her hands shake against the rope. Mason's face stayed calm, but there was something tired in it, like someone who had been holding a heavy load for too long. He looked at Ava, and his voice finally came out, low and steady. Ava, he said. Just her name. Not girl, not wife, not poor village girl. Her name. Ava swallowed, her lips trembled. What is this? She whispered. Mason's eyes held hers, and for a moment the noise of the village disappeared. I never wanted it to come like this, he said. Mama Rose stepped forward, shaking. Mason, what is he saying? Are you rich? Mason didn't answer her. He kept looking at Ava, like the truth was for her first. Then the chief barked, trying to regain control. Enough, even if he is rich, what is that to us? Debt is debt, the girl is mine to give. Mr. Pierce's face hardened. Chief, he said, you don't understand. If you proceed with this, you are kidnapping, you are assaulting, you are committing crimes that will put you in prison, not in a village court, in a real court. The chief's guards shifted uneasily. Chief Mado raised his chin. You think your city law scares me. This is our tradition. Mr. Pierce nodded once, almost like he respected the stubbornness. Tradition does not excuse cruelty. Then the woman with the tablet stepped forward and spoke for the first time. We have documentation, she said. Video evidence, witness statements, and the debt you claim the Robinson family owes is not legally enforceable. It's a fabricated number, inflated over years with illegal interest. Mama Rose gasped like she'd been stabbed. It's not true, she whispered. We paid what we could. Chief Madu's eyes darted left and right, calculating, searching for support. But support was slipping away because those SUVs were real, those suits were real, and for once, the chief's power looked small. Ava's mind spun. Mason, the quiet man, the poor man. A billionaire. It felt impossible. But the way the suit stood behind him, the way Mr. Pierce spoke like he was protecting something valuable, the way Mason didn't look surprised by any of it. It was true. Ava's throat went dry. So many questions fought to come out. Why was he here? Why did he live like that? Why didn't he tell anyone? And the biggest one, why her? Before she could speak, Mason finally moved. He walked past the chief and his guards, straight to the wooden post. The crowd parted like water. He reached for the rope at Ava's wrists. His fingers were gentle. Ava flinched anyway, because gentle hands in a violent place feel confusing. Mason leaned closer. His voice meant only for her. I'm going to untie you, he said, but you have to trust me. Ava's eyes filled. Trust? After everything tonight. After being dragged, tied, humiliated. But Mason's hands were steady, and his eyes weren't hungry or cruel. They were protective, like he hated the rope more than she did. He loosened the knot. The rope slipped off her wrists. Ava's arms fell to her sides, aching. She rubbed her skin, staring at the red marks. The crowd started whispering again, louder now. She's free. The chief is finished. That man was hiding money. He fooled us. Chief Madu's face twisted with rage. "You think you can come here and disgrace me?" he shouted at Mason. "You think your money can buy our respect?" Mason straightened slowly. Now that Ava was untied, Mason stepped in front of her, placing himself between her and the chief. His voice rose, clear enough for everyone. "I didn't come to disgrace you," he said. "You disgraced yourself." The village gasped. No one spoke to the chief like that. Chief Madu's nostrils flared. "You have no authority here." Mason's eyes narrowed. "You're right," he said. "I have no authority here." He paused. Then he added, calm as a man placing a final stone. "But the law does." Chief Madu snapped his fingers at his guards. "Seize him." The guards hesitated. They looked at the SUVs, the suits, the calm confidence of Mr. Pierce. Then they looked at Mason. And then, shockingly, they did something no one expected. They stepped back. Chief Madu's jaw dropped. "You fools," he hissed. Mr. Pierce raised his hand, and two suited men moved forward, quietly but firmly. "We're not here to fight," Mr. Pierce said. "We're here to escort Mr. Carter out and to ensure Miss Robinson is safe." Ava's heart pounded. Safe? That word sounded foreign. Mason turned slightly, speaking over his shoulder to Ava. "Ava," he said, "come with me." Ava stared at him. The whole village stared at her. She felt like a leaf caught between two storms. If she went with him, she would be leaving everything she knew. If she stayed, she would be staying with a chief who had tied her to a post and called it tradition. Her mother's eyes begged her from the crowd, terrified, hopeful, ashamed all at once. Ava's lips parted. But before she could move, Chief Madu reached into his robe and pulled out a small carved object. A charm, dark and worn, tied with red string. His voice dropped low, dangerous. "If you step out of this square with her," he said to Mason, "you will regret it." Mason didn't flinch. Chief Madu lifted the charm and shouted to the night, loud enough for the whole village to hear. "Elders, witness this. This girl is promised. This man is stealing what belongs to our land." The elders stirred uneasy. Some looked away, some looked torn. Then Chief Madu's eyes locked onto Ava's mother. "And you," he said, pointing at Mama Rose, "if your daughter leaves, your family will pay for it. You think the village will protect you. You think your son will be safe." Caleb's face went pale. Mama Rose grabbed Caleb's shoulder, pulling him close. Ava felt something snap inside her. Fear turned into anger, so hot it made her hands shake. Mason's voice was suddenly tight. "Don't threaten her family." Chief Madu smiled like a snake. "Then leave the girl." Ava stepped forward, trembling, and stood beside Mason. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "No," she said, "I'm leaving." The village erupted. People shouted. Some begged, some insulted, some prayed. Mama Rose cried out. "Ava." Ava turned, tears running now. "Mama," she said, "I will come back for you, I swear." Mason glanced at Mr. Pierce. The suited men moved in formation, creating space. Ava took one step, then another. She and Mason started toward the SUVs. Chief Madu's face twisted into something ugly. He raised his hand, and a sharp whistle cut the air. From the shadows near the trees, a young man rushed forward, one of the chief's loyal boys, holding something in his hands. A small jerry can. Kerosene. Before anyone understood, the boy splashed the kerosene onto the nearest SUV. Gasps exploded. Mr. Pierce shouted, "Stop him." But the boy was already striking a match. A tiny flame flickered. Ava screamed. Mason moved like lightning, shoving Ava behind him, sprinting toward the SUV. The match dropped. The kerosene caught. Fire leapt up the side of the vehicle, bright and angry, licking at the tinted windows. The crowd screamed and scattered. And above the chaos, Chief Madu's voice rose, full of triumph. "Let your money save you now." Mason reached the burning SUV, yanked the back door open, and grabbed something from inside. A black briefcase. He turned back toward Ava, firelight flashing across his face. But in that same moment, the flames roared higher, and the heat slammed into the air like a wall. Ava saw Mason's sleeve catch fire. She saw his jaw clench. She saw him stagger, still holding the briefcase like it mattered more than his own skin. Then Mr. Pierce shouted something Ava couldn't hear. And the woman with the tablet screamed, "Mason, drop it." Mason looked at the briefcase, then at Ava. His eyes told her everything without words. This briefcase was the reason he had been hiding. The reason he had been living poor. The reason people had come tonight. And whatever was inside was worth dying for. Ava took a step toward him, panicking. "Mason." He lifted the briefcase slightly, as if showing her. Then he shouted over the fire, voice raw. "Ava, if anything happens to me, you must not let Chief Madu get this case." Ava froze. Chief Madu, still standing near the post, laughed loudly, raising his charm again like a victory flag. And just as the flames surged and Mason stumbled backward, the burning SUV made a terrible cracking sound. The fuel tank groaned. The air sucked in. Ava's scream got stuck in her throat. Because she realized, in that instant, the SUV was about to explode. And Mason was still right beside it, holding the secret that could change everything. And then, just before the explosion, just before the world turned white, Ava saw someone else step out of the shadows behind Mason. A tall figure. A face half covered. A hand holding something metallic that caught the firelight. A gun. The figure raised it, aiming at Mason's back. Ava's whole body turned to ice. And the gun clicked. The explosion never came. At least, not when everyone expected it. The clicking sound of the gun echoed louder in Ava's ears than the roar of the fire. Time stretched thin, like a rope about to snap. "Mason!" she screamed, her voice tearing out of her chest. The tall figure behind him froze. The gun trembled slightly in his hand. For a split second, Ava thought she saw uncertainty flash across the man's eyes, even through the shadows. Then everything happened at once. Mr. Pierce shouted a command. One of the suited men lunged forward, tackling the armed figure from the side. The gun fired into the air, the sound cracking through the night like thunder. Birds exploded out of the trees. The crowd screamed again, ducking and running. Mason didn't wait. He hurled the briefcase away from the burning SUV, sending it skidding across the dusty ground toward Ava. Then he ripped off his jacket, beating at the flames climbing up his sleeve. The fire resisted for a moment, stubborn and hungry, before finally dying down. The SUV shuddered violently. "Everyone back," Mr. Pierce yelled. Mason ran. He grabbed Ava's arm and pulled her hard, both of them stumbling backward just as the fuel tank finally gave in. The explosion ripped through the night. Fire blasted upward, lighting the entire village square like daylight. Heat slammed into their backs, throwing people off their feet. Windows shattered. Goats broke free and scattered. The sound rolled outward, bouncing off hills, carrying fear far beyond the village. Ava hit the ground hard, Mason landing partly over her, shielding her with his body. For a few seconds, all she could hear was ringing. Then coughing. Shouting. Crying. When Ava opened her eyes, sparks floated down like angry fireflies. The SUV was a burning skeleton now, flames chewing at what was left. Mason pushed himself up, breathing hard. His face was smeared with soot, his sleeve burned through, skin underneath red and raw. But he was alive. Ava grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into him like she needed proof he was real. "You're alive," she whispered. Mason looked at her, eyes dark, intense. "So are you." Behind them, the suited men had the armed attacker pinned to the ground. The hood slipped off, revealing a young face Ava recognized instantly. It was Jonah. one of Chief Madu's most loyal boys. The same boy who used to fetch water for the chief, who used to boast about becoming powerful someday. Jonah's eyes darted wildly as he struggled. I didn't mean, he started. Enough, Mr. Pierce said sharply. Tie him. The woman with the tablet was already on her phone, speaking rapidly, her calm cracking for the first time. Chief Madu stood frozen near the post, his charm hanging uselessly from his fingers. The firelight painted his face in harsh orange, exposing every line, every drop of fear he'd tried to hide for years. His authority had just gone up in flames. Literally. Mason stood, pulling Ava up with him. She winced as her legs shook, but she stayed on her feet. The briefcase lay a few steps away, dusty but untouched by fire. Ava stared at it. That thing, she said softly. What is inside? Mason followed her gaze. Proof, he said, and truth. Before she could ask more, a loud wail rose from the crowd. Mama Rose pushed through people, tears streaking her face. Caleb clung to her wrapper, sobbing. Ava, Mama Rose cried, grabbing her daughter tightly. I thought I lost you. Ava held her mother, like she might never let go. I'm okay, she whispered. I promise. Mama Rose pulled back and looked at Mason, really looked at him, from his burned sleeve to his steady eyes. You, she said slowly, who are you really? Mason bowed his head slightly, respectful. My name is Mason Carter, he said again, and I owe your daughter an explanation. Chief Madu found his voice then, thin and sharp. Explanation, he spat. You come here, burn my village, disgrace me, and you talk of explanations. Mason turned to him. You burned nothing, Mason said calmly. Your greed did. Chief Madu took a step forward, rage shaking him. You think because you have money, you can destroy tradition. Mason took a step closer too, unafraid. No, he said. I think because I am human, I can stop abuse. The elders shifted, murmuring among themselves. Some nodded slowly, others looked ashamed. Mr. Pierce stepped between them. This situation has escalated beyond your control, Chief, he said. Authorities are on their way. That word hit the village like a drumbeat. Authorities. Chief Madu's eyes widened. You called the police. The woman with the tablet answered without looking up. And federal investigators. The chief's knees seemed to weaken. No, he whispered. Yuka. Mason spoke again, his voice carrying across the square. For years, he said, you used debt to control families. You forced girls into marriages they didn't choose. You hid behind tradition to cover cruelty. He gestured to Ava. Tonight it ends. Chief Madu looked around desperately, but the crowd's eyes had changed. Where there had once been fear, there was now doubt, and doubt is dangerous to men who rule by force. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Real ones. Chief Madu dropped the charm. It hit the ground with a dull thud. The power he thought it held vanished with the sound. As the chaos settled, Mr. Pierce approached Mason quietly. You were supposed to leave this place weeks ago, he said under his breath. You stayed too long. Mason nodded. I know. You could have died tonight. Mason glanced at Ava. But she would have died slowly if I hadn't stayed. Mr. Pierce followed his gaze and sighed. You're still the same, he said, still stubborn. Mason allowed himself a faint smile. Later, after the authorities arrived and Chief Madu was taken away shouting curses that echoed uselessly into the night, the village felt different, quieter, like something heavy had finally been lifted. Ava sat on a low stool near her mother's hut. Her wrists still ached, her mind even more. Mason approached, holding a bottle of water. Here, he said gently. She took it, their fingers brushing. Thank you, she said, then hesitated. For everything. Mason sat across from her, careful, like he didn't want to crowd her. I owe you the truth now, he said. Ava nodded. I came here 5 years ago, Mason began, after my father died. He paused, choosing his words. My family is rich, powerful, but power attracts ugly people, people who pretend to love you while planning how to use you. Ava listened quietly. When my father died, Mason continued, his partners started fighting over control. Lawsuits, threats, even attempts on my life. Mama Rose gasped softly. I disappeared, Mason said. Changed my name, hid where no one would look, a poor village. Ava frowned. And the money? I locked it away, he said. Accounts only accessible with this. He nodded toward the briefcase. Documents, codes, proof of ownership. So you chose to live poor? Ava asked. Yes, he said simply. I wanted to know who I was without money, and I wanted to know who people were when they thought I had nothing. Ava swallowed. And what did you learn? Mason looked at her. That kindness has nothing to do with wealth, he said, and cruelty often hides behind power. Silence stretched between them. Ava finally asked the question that had been burning her chest. Why me? Mason didn't answer right away. When I first saw you, he said slowly, you were arguing with a traitor who tried to cheat your mother. You didn't shout. You didn't beg. You stood your ground. Ava looked away, embarrassed. I watched you for months, Mason admitted. You worked, you laughed, you suffered, and you never let bitterness own you. He met her eyes. I didn't plan to love you, he said quietly, but I did. Ava's breath caught. Love. The word felt too big for the pain she'd been through. And you still let them tie me up, she asked, hurt slipping into her voice despite herself. Mason's face tightened. I was trapped, he said. If I revealed myself too early, my enemies would have found me. They were already getting close. He glanced toward the burnt SUV. Tonight proved it. Ava nodded slowly. She understood the logic, but understanding didn't erase fear. So what happens now? She asked. Mason took a deep breath. Now, he said, you choose. She frowned. Choose what? Whether you want anything to do with me, he said honestly. With my world, my dangers, my truth. Ava looked around her village. The huts, the people whispering, her mother holding Caleb close. Then she looked back at Mason. Her life had already changed forever. The question was how much more she was willing to risk. Before she could answer, Mr. Pierce approached again. We need to leave before dawn, he said. It's not safe to stay. Mason nodded. Ava's heart raced. Leave. Now. She stood, her hands trembling. Mason rose too, waiting, not touching her, not forcing anything. Ava looked at her mother. Mama Rose's eyes were full, but she smiled bravely. Go, she said softly. Find your life. Ava turned back to Mason. Her voice shook. I don't know what the future looks like, she said, but I know I don't want to be afraid anymore. Mason held out his hand. Then walk with me, he said. Ava stared at his hand. And slowly, she reached for it. As their fingers locked, the briefcase sat nearby, silent and heavy, holding secrets that could change their lives in ways Ava couldn't yet imagine. And somewhere beyond the village, in a city full of glass and shadows, people who thought Mason Carter was still missing were about to realize something terrifying. He was alive, and he was coming back. If this story is already pulling you in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Share it with someone who loves powerful folktales like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from right now. And tell us this. If you were in Ava's position, would you walk away from everything you know to follow a man with a dangerous secret? The road out of the village was quiet, but Ava's mind was not. She sat in the back seat of the remaining SUV, hands folded tightly in her lap, watching the outlines of trees slide past the window. The night air smelled different out here, less dust, more cold metal and smoke from the burned vehicle they had left behind. Mason sat beside her, silent, his burned arm wrapped in a clean white bandage. He looked calm on the outside, but Ava noticed the small signs now. The way his jaw tightened when headlights appeared in the distance, the way his eyes checked mirrors without thinking. This world was not peaceful. It was watchful. The convoy moved fast, tires crunching over gravel roads until the village lights disappeared completely. For the first time in her life, Ava realized how small her world had been and how quickly it had vanished. After nearly an hour, the vehicles turned off the main road and passed through a tall iron gate that slid open without a sound. Beyond it stood a large compound, hidden by thick trees and high walls. Security lights came on automatically. Ava stared. This wasn't a palace. It wasn't flashy, but everything about it spoke of control and money used carefully. Cameras rotated silently. Guards nodded as the SUV passed. The building itself was wide and modern, stone and glass blended together. "This is yours?" Ava asked quietly. Mason nodded. "One of many," he said, "but this one is safe." The word safe again. The SUVs stopped under a covered entrance. As soon as they stepped out, people appeared, doctors, security personnel, assistants. Mason was guided toward a chair while someone examined his arm. Ava stood awkwardly to the side, suddenly feeling small again, her village dress out of place among tailored suits and clean floors. Mr. Pierce approached her. "You did well back there," he said kindly. Ava nodded, unsure what to say. "I'll have someone bring you clean clothes and food," he continued. "You're safe here." Safe? Everyone kept saying it. But Ava didn't feel safe. She felt suspended, like her feet hadn't touched the ground since the rope was cut from her wrists. Mason looked up at her from the chair. "Stay," he said softly. She did. Later that night, Ava sat alone in a guest room bigger than her family's entire hut. The bed was wide, the sheets white and soft. There was a bathroom attached with running water that didn't need to be fetched from a well. She washed slowly, scrubbing dirt and fear from her skin. But no matter how long she stood under the water, her thoughts stayed loud. Mason was a billionaire. The man she'd watched fix roofs for pennies. The man who'd eaten cassava with her family. The man who'd let her believe he was powerless. She wrapped herself in a towel and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. A soft knock came at the door. "Yes," she called. Mason stepped in, now wearing a clean shirt, his arm in a sling. "I just wanted to check on you," he said. "If you want to sleep, I'll leave." Ava nodded toward the chair. "Sit," she said, "please." He sat, keeping a careful distance. Silence stretched. Then Ava spoke. "Your enemies," she said, "the ones you were hiding from, are they done?" Mason shook his head slowly. "No." Her chest tightened. "They know I'm alive now," he continued, "and they know I came back with the briefcase." "What's in it?" Ava asked again. Mason leaned back, eyes lifting to the ceiling. "My father's final will," he said, "and evidence." "Evidence of what?" "Of betrayal," he answered. "Of partners who stole, killed, and buried the truth under contracts in silence." Ava swallowed. "So they'll come for you?" "Yes." "And for me?" she asked. Mason looked at her, serious. "If you stay near me," he said, "you will be in danger." Ava laughed softly, bitter. "I was tied to a post today," she said. "Threatened with marriage and death. Danger already found me." Mason winced. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For letting you get hurt before I stepped in fully." Ava studied his face. "Why didn't you just buy the village?" she asked. "Pay the debt and leave." Mason met her gaze. "Because some things grow when you feed them," he said, "and I didn't want to fund more cruelty." Ava nodded slowly. The logic made sense. The pain didn't disappear, but it settled. The next morning, news arrived like a storm. The woman with the tablet, her name was Alina, stood in the living room, reading from her screen. "2 attempted asset seizures blocked," she said. "1 private investigator arrested near the village. and an injunction filed by the Northbridge Group claiming ownership of Carter Consolidated. Mason exhaled slowly. "They've started," he said. Ava watched him carefully. "What does that mean?" "It means," Mason said, standing, "that I have to go to the city." Ava's heart skipped. "The city," she repeated. "Yes, to face them in public. And me." Mason hesitated. "You can stay here," he said gently. "It's safer." Ava stood up. "No." Mason frowned. "No," he echoed. "I won't hide while you fight," she said. "If your world is dangerous, then let me see it clearly." Mason searched her face. "This isn't a movie," he warned. "They won't fight fair." "Neither did the chief," Ava replied. "I survived him." Mason let out a breath that was half a laugh, half fear. "All right," he said, "but you stay close to security at all times." The city rose before Ava like another planet. Tall buildings of glass and steel, roads packed with cars that moved like rivers, people everywhere, dressed sharply, moving fast, eyes always forward. Mason's name opened doors. They stayed in a penthouse high above the noise, surrounded by guards who barely blinked. Ava watched news channels, showing blurred footage of the village incident. Headlines flashed. Air RETURNS, after years in hiding. Secret billionaire exposed. Rural abuse case sparks investigation. Mason stood at the window, hands in his pockets. "They're shaping the story," he said, "before I can." "Then tell it yourself," Ava said. He looked at her. "You'd stand beside me?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "but don't protect me with lies." Mason nodded. "I won't." The press conference was scheduled for the next day. But that night, Ava woke suddenly. The room was dark. Too dark. The city lights outside were gone. Then she heard it. A soft click. Her door handle moved. Ava's breath stopped. The door creaked open just an inch. A shadow slipped inside. And in that moment, Ava understood something clearly for the first time. Leaving the village had not ended her nightmare. It had only changed its shape. Ava didn't scream. She didn't know why. Maybe fear stole her voice. Maybe instinct took over. Or maybe something deep inside her refused to be a victim again. The shadow moved fully into the room. Ava's heart pounded so loud she was sure it would give her away. She slid her hand slowly under the pillow, her fingers brushing against the small metal object Mason's head of security had insisted she keep there. A panic button. The figure stepped closer, tall, careful, familiar in the wrong way. Moonlight slipped through the curtains, just enough for Ava to see the glint of a knife. Her finger pressed down. Silently, lights exploded on. The room flooded with brightness as security poured in from every direction. The intruder spun, but it was too late. Within seconds, he was on the floor, his arm twisted behind his back, the knife clattering uselessly across the marble tiles. Ava sat up, shaking now, breath coming fast. Mason burst into the room moments later, barefoot, his face pale with fury and fear. "Ava," he shouted, rushing to her side. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, tears finally spilling. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm okay." Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Security dragged the intruder up. Mason's grip tightened. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The man laughed, even with his arm twisted painfully. "You already know," he sneered. "You should have stayed dead, Carter." Mason's eyes went cold. "Take him away," he said. When the room finally cleared, Ava sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket. Mason knelt in front of her, his voice low. "This is why I wanted you away from all this," he said. "They won't stop." Ava looked at him steadily. "Neither will I," she replied. Morning came with heavy news. The intruder was linked to Northbridge Group, the same corporation trying to seize Mason's company. Worse, Evidence showed they had already infiltrated parts of Mason's security network. "They're bold," Alina said during the emergency meeting. "That means they're desperate." "Or confident," Mr. Pierce added. "They believe Mason won't survive long enough to fight back." Mason leaned forward, hands clasped. "Then we change the rules," he said. He stood and turned on the large screen at the front of the room. Files appeared, documents, names, numbers. "My father didn't just leave me money," Mason said. "He left me leverage." Ava watched closely. "What kind of leverage?" she asked. Mason looked at her. "The kind that destroys powerful people." He explained it all then. His father had known he was being betrayed. Before his death, he had secretly recorded meetings, transferred evidence, and hidden financial trails that linked Northbridge executives to fraud, bribery, and murder. "All of it is in the briefcase," Mason said, "and mirrored in secure locations only I can access." "So why haven't you released it already?" Ava asked. "Because timing matters," Mason replied. "If I move too early, they bury the story. If I move too late, they kill me." Ava's stomach tightened. "And the press conference?" she asked. "That's the bait," Mason said. "I go public, I confirm I'm alive, I confirm I'm the heir." "And they react," Ava said quietly. "Yes." The press conference hall was packed. Cameras, microphones, journalists from everywhere. Ava stood just behind the curtain with Mason, her heart racing. She wore a simple dress Alina had chosen, elegant but not flashy. "You don't have to stand out there," Mason said softly. "I can do this alone." Ava shook her head. "No," she said. "They should see who you're fighting for." Mason searched her face, then nodded. They stepped out together. The room erupted. Questions flew from every direction. "Mason Carter, where have you been? Is it true you lived as a poor laborer? Who is the woman beside you?" Mason raised his hand. The room slowly quieted. "For 5 years," Mason began, "I lived without my name, my money, or my protection. Not because I was weak, but because I needed the truth." He spoke calmly, clearly, laying out his disappearance, his father's death, the corruption within his own company. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to Ava. "This woman," he said, placing a gentle hand over hers, "was almost forced into marriage because powerful men thought they could control her life." The room murmured. "That is why I am here," Mason continued. "Not just to reclaim a company, but to end systems that profit from fear." Cameras flashed. Ava's face was everywhere. And so was the truth. Within hours, stock prices shook, warrants were issued, Northbridge executives went into hiding. But power never falls quietly. That night, as Mason and Ava returned to the penthouse, Alina received a call. Her face drained of color. "They've frozen some of your accounts," she said, "and they've gone after the village." Ava's breath caught. "My mother," she whispered. Mason stood abruptly. "They crossed the line," he said. Sirens wailed faintly outside, distant but constant. "This isn't just business anymore," Mason said, his voice hardening. "It's war." Ava looked up at him, fear and determination mixing in her chest. "Then we go back," she said. Mason met her gaze. "Yes," he agreed, "we go back." And far away, in a dark office lit only by city lights, a man watched the press conference replay on repeat. He smiled slowly. "Bring me the girl," he said. "If Carter wants to be a hero, let's see how much he's willing to lose." The screen paused on Ava's face. And the trap was set. The village looked smaller when Ava returned. Not because it had changed, but because she had. The convoy arrived just before dawn, dust rising softly under the early light. The burnt marks from the explosion were still there, black scars on the ground near the square. People came out of their huts slowly, cautiously, like animals unsure whether the danger had truly passed. Ava stepped out of the SUV, beside Mason. Every eye turned toward them. Whispers moved faster than footsteps. That's her. She came back. The billionaire. Mama Rose stood near their hut, holding Caleb's hand tightly. When she saw Ava, she broke down completely, crying and laughing at the same time. Ava ran to her mother, holding her as if the world might try to pull them apart again. I'm here, Ava whispered. No one will touch you again. Behind them, Mason stood quietly, watching the village with sharp eyes. His security team spread out discreetly, blending into the background but missing nothing. Mr. Pierce approached. They made their move last night, he said under his breath. Northbridge tried to scare the village, threats, fake agents, but we intercepted everything. Mason nodded. Good, he said. Now we end it. The elders gathered in the square, uneasy but curious. Without Chief Madhu, the place felt different. Lighter, but fear still lingered. Mason stepped forward. I didn't come back with money, he said clearly. I came back with truth. He opened the briefcase. Inside were documents, flash drives, sealed envelopes. Proof. Alina connected a screen to a generator. Faces appeared, Northbridge executives, recorded conversations, bank transfers, orders given to silence people who knew too much. Gasps filled the square. This, Mason said, is why my father was killed, and why I was hunted. He turned slightly toward Ava, then back to the elders. And this village, he continued, was used as a hiding place for cruelty disguised as tradition. The elders shifted uncomfortably. Mason didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply let the truth sit between them. Authorities arrived shortly after, real ones, warrants in hand, evidence already verified, names already flagged. By midday, the news had spread everywhere. Northbridge collapsed under the weight of its own crimes. Arrests followed, assets frozen, confessions made. The man who had ordered Ava's abduction was caught trying to flee the country. And just like that, the nightmare began to loosen its grip. Days later, the village gathered again in the square, but this time no ropes, no guards, no fear. Mason stood before them. I will rebuild this place, he said, not as a ruler, not as a chief, but as a partner. He paused. Schools, clean water, work that pays fairly, and no debt used as a weapon ever again. The elders bowed their heads. Ava watched him, emotions twisting in her chest. The poor man they had mocked, the billionaire they never knew, the man who had chosen her life over his safety. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Ava and Mason sat beneath the mango tree near her mother's hut. The same tree where children used to play. Everything has changed, Ava said quietly. Mason nodded. Yes. And you could leave, she said. Go back to your towers and meetings and guards. I could, he agreed. She looked at him. But you won't. Mason smiled softly. No, he said, because wealth means nothing if it doesn't protect what matters. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A simple ring. No cameras, no speeches. Ava, he said, his voice steady but honest. I was born into money, but you taught me dignity. Will you walk this life with me, not as a debt, not as a secret, but as my choice? Ava's eyes filled with tears. The poor village girl who had been tied to a post. The girl who had been told she had no choice. Now standing in freedom. Yes, she said, I choose you. They embraced as the village watched, not in fear, but in hope. Years later, people would tell the story differently. They would say a poor girl married a billionaire. But those who truly knew the truth would say this. A brave girl was forced toward darkness. And a man who hid his wealth chose to reveal himself. Not to save his fortune, but to save her life. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves powerful folktales like this. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen power used to protect instead of control? What would you have done if you were in Ava's place? Your voice matters.